Martin Johnson was born and raised in Hull, and after a successful military career with the Royal Navy, he spent his subsequent years in business, working his way up to a large sales role within global IT consultancy firm Gartner. His passion and desire to develop people inspired him to launch Trans2 Performance as co-founder, where he is now currently CEO. He's here to talk to us tonight about demystifying culture. So please give a massive T2 Talks welcome to Martin Johnson.
Thanks, Lee. He doesn't often say really nice things about me, so it's lovely to hear. So thank you all for coming, and we really appreciate it. T2 Talks continues to grow. So just a show of hands to start with, and I want you to be sincere when I ask this question. Who here this evening is genuinely open to hearing something which could drive a positive change in your personal or professional life? Raise your hand. How can you not raise your hand to that, right? Pretty much everybody, which is great. So you've come to the right place. So let's start off with a quick challenge then. Here, I have a tennis ball. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce the tennis ball on the stage. And when the tennis ball hits the stage and you hear the sound, the thud of the tennis ball, I want you to clap your hands. Yeah? So there's 150 people in this room this evening. We should hear one sound. If our coordination is together, we should hear one sound. If you can't see the stage, feel free to just quickly stand up at the back. Let's have a practice and see how it sounds, right? A nice slow one to start with. Pretty good. On the wind down here already. Pretty good. Okay, one more practice. It was a bit staggered, so we need it as one loud sound. One more time, let's go. Amazing, we've cracked it. So now it's going to get faster. And it's going to get faster, and I need you to clap every single time the ball hits the ground. And if you don't clap when the ball hits the ground, you're out, right? And we've got to get on with it, and we've got people watching. So let's go. You're all out. You're all out in 5 bounces. So what is my point there, and why did I start with that? We as human beings, we form habits incredibly quickly, and we form them primarily for 3 reasons. The first reason is copied or learned behaviours from people we spend a lot of time with or we're influenced by. The second reason we form habits is when something is really easy or comfortable. And when we are comfortable doing something, we do it time and time again. And the third reason we form habits is when something is successful and you're getting self-fulfillment. And there and then with that tennis ball exercise, you wasn't quite sure at the start, but 2, 3, 4 bounces in, you started to have success and you formed a very, very quick habit. And even successful habits can change and go wrong. This evening, you're going to hear 4 talks by 4 different people. And in their own unique way, they are designed to challenge the habits. So, over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to talk about a topic that I have become fascinated with. In fact, obsessed about. And it's this topic of organisational culture or corporate culture. But what is culture? And why is it so valuable? And why is it so important? And why is it seen as this sort of blue sky, fluffy, intangible thing which we don't really understand? Well, let's start with the definition of the word culture. If you look in the dictionary, it will come across something like this. A culture is a way of life of a group of people. It reflects the beliefs, values, and behaviours that they accept, generally without thinking about them. So what this is telling us is that a culture is formed when a group of people unconsciously share the same values and beliefs and then collectively go forward and they behave and act in a united way. Now, outside of the product or service that we provide, this has got to be the greatest influence on your business's success. A great CEO and a mentor of mine once put it best, and I still look to him for advice today. He said, the thing is, Martin, he said, as businesses, we can afford to lose people. We can afford to lose deals, contracts, sales. We can even afford to lose money. But the one thing we cannot afford to lose is a shred of belief for what we do. And that, to me, has been the best analogy of what a culture is in our business. The great Peter Drucker once said, and if you haven't read anything by Peter Drucker, look it up. But the great Peter Drucker once said that organisational culture will eat your strategy for breakfast, lunch and dinner. And when you think about it, that's quite true, right? But I like to flip this upside down, because a negative organisational culture, in my experience working with businesses, a negative organisational culture will eat your productivity, your efficiency and your team morale for breakfast, lunch and dinner. But what this is telling us is that either way, organisational culture is an incredibly powerful and influential thing. Now, just to highlight the disconnect, a leading company called Deloitte surveyed 7,000 business executives in 130 countries, and they asked the questions on culture. 86% of business executives recognise the value of culture in their business. However, only 28% said that they truly understood what culture is, how it manifests, and how we can influence it. And of that 28%, just 12% said they were driving the right culture within that business. And I hazard a guess, if I visited that 12%, it wouldn't be 12%. Certainly in my experience over the last 2 years. So why is that? Having worked with small, medium, and large corporations over the past 2 years on organisational culture, I can tell you firsthand there is 2 reasons for this disconnect. The first one is an understanding, a true understanding of the subjects, which I'm going to try and demystify this evening. The second one, which is the biggest inhibitor to driving the right culture in your business, is ownership. Being with somebody who is responsible in your business for driving organisational culture. Now, I'm not saying in all cases, because there'll be people in this room, I've seen the list before I put my foot in it, there'll be people in this room who are the head of culture, they're responsible for culture, but in 99% of the cases, it's a shared responsibility within a business. And do you know the problem in business with a shared responsibility? It is nobody's problem. It's nobody's problem. So let's look into this over the next 20 minutes and see if we can demystify what it is that the great companies do when it comes to driving culture. Now, contrary to many people's beliefs, and I stand by this comment I'm about to make, we as leaders and leadership teams, we don't create culture. The notion that we go to a 5-star hotel in an off-site for 2 days and we write our mission, vision, values, goals, strategies, and then we get it, put into some sexy marketing collateral, or we paint it on the walls and bang, we have a culture. It doesn't work like that. What actually creates organisational culture, or allows your culture to manifest in your business, is 3 main dynamics. 1, the environment you provide. 2, the people you put in that environment. And 3, the results you generate as a business. I'll say that again. What creates organisational culture is the environment you provide, the people you put in that environment, and the results you generate as a business. But here's the thing on this, the first key point I want to make. You have to see it how it is, not better or worse. Having worked with so many companies on this, I'm telling us now, and we can all put our hands up or smile if you like, we as leaders and business owners, we think our culture is better than what it is. And the workers, they think it's worse. And the first starting point we must start with in our businesses is to understand what it looks like, exactly how it is. If you want to develop a culture, see it how it is. So let's break these 3 dynamics down. What do I mean about your environment? Because that's a huge saying, a huge statement in businesses. Well, our research has found, and our dealings have found, that actually your people's experience of their environment in your business is largely triggered by 3 things. The first one is the way you communicate. The way you communicate as a business. And I'm telling you now, if we strip it right back, this will feel either one of 2 ways within your business. And I want you to think about the way you communicate now and pick a side of the fence. It will either feel visionary, collaborative, open and transparent, where we're getting people behind the dream, we're inviting them to come on the journey, we embrace contribution, and it's a real visionary approach to communication. Or it will feel directive. One-way instructional communication. This is what we do, this is how you do it, and you have to do it by this date, and we'll measure it. It will either feel visionary or directive. The second thing that will give your people their experience of their environment is the way they operate, or the way they're allowed to operate in the business. or execute, the way we physically go about doing our job. And this again will feel largely one of two ways. Your people will either have a level of ownership on how they execute. They will actually be given the creative freedom or a little bit of freedom or a level of freedom to go forward and do their job in their own way, as long as the end result is the same. Or it will be very process driven. Again, this is the things we do best. These are the paths you follow. These are the sequences, the processes, and you do them time and time again, and we'll measure it. The third thing here, which will form your people's experience of their environment, is how they are rewarded and recognized. These are the top 3 things in employee surveys that give them their experience of their environment, their culture. And we hate acronyms here at Trans2, but I stumbled across this one, so I'm taking it. It forms your core, your COR, the way you communicate, the way you operate, and the way you reward. If you want to develop a culture, you need to understand how that core looks today. You need to be so honest to understand how that core looks today and put a positive plan to influence it moving forward. So that's all great, right? We've got an environment and we want to create a great environment for our people and our culture. But your ability to attract, develop and retain the right people, and this is important, and where necessary, remove the wrong people, will have a huge bearing on your culture. But this is a key point here. The most amount of questions I get asked on people and culture is this: should we be embracing diversity with our people, or should we be looking for consistency? And it's a great question. And the answer is both. But we need to understand what it's meant by diversity and consistency. It is perfectly okay to have an identity and a culture in your business whilst maintaining diversity when it comes to skills, traits and personalities. Because if you think about that, for different job roles, we need different skill sets. We need different types of traits. And what makes groups of people work so dynamic and innovative together is when we have different social styles and personality styles. So you should absolutely embrace diversity when it comes to your people. However, and this is the big one on culture, which 90% of the business I work with can't seem to get a grip of, you have to drive consistency when it comes to mindset, values and beliefs. You have to have like-minded people. Because remember the definition of culture, a way of life of a group of people who share the same values, beliefs and behaviours. If you want to develop a culture, it is perfectly okay to embrace diversity when it comes to skills, traits and personalities, and 99% of your interview techniques will test for those. But what we must do is gather like-minded people. And the third and final dynamic which creates your organisational culture is the results that you generate as a business. And the beauty and the simplicity about this is you can only really generate 3 results, right? Positive, negative or average, indifferent. And these for me, and I want this to be a really important point, these for me are the self-perpetuating sort of cycle of your culture. Because a positive result will offer the social proof that what you're doing is right, keep going. A negative result will say we're not quite there or we're not there, let's change something. And an indifferent result will say, well, we're on the right track, but we've got progress to make. So results are the ultimate measurement of our success. They are the ultimate metric of success, don't get me wrong, but here's a word of caution. Don't become consumed by results and outputs. I see it all the time with leadership teams. We become consumed by them, so much so that we start to manage, communicate, and even reward or reprimand solely by them. And in doing so, we forget to coach and develop the inputs required to achieve the results in the first place. If you want to develop a culture in your business, don't become too fixated on the outputs. Focus on the inputs, and the outputs will surely come. Okay, so given what I've just said there about how a culture is created, it's the environment you provide, the people we put in that environment, and the results we generate. I want you now, as I talk through this, to think about your business and think about where you might be today. There are 4 types of organisational culture we have come across in the last 2 years. 4 types. And the way we measure this as an early indicator is we take the way you communicate, visionary or directive, and the way you operate, a level of ownership or majority process. And we put them into combinations and it creates 4 cultures. And I want you to think about what your culture might be. The first culture we come across is what we call the entrepreneurial culture. This is one which mixes a visionary and collaborative and open, transparent communication style with a true majority ownership when it comes to execution and operation. And we call it the entrepreneurial culture because it's bang in the creativity zone. Low on standardization and quality control. It's a bit of the Wild West at times in terms of rules and regulations, but it's there and designed to promote ownership and creativity. We use Google as an example of this culture. The second type of culture we see is what we call the design culture. And this is one which again mixes the visionary and the collaborative style of communication, but this time with a more process-driven approach to its execution. So it tries to balance the 2 axes, and what it's trying to do is focus on quality, and we use Apple as an example of this. When it comes to actually building Apple products and manufacturing products, there is a well-defined process, and what comes out at the end is a beautifully designed product. The third culture we come across is the military culture. This is one which mixes the directive style of communication with the process-driven approach to operation and execution. And high on standardization and quality control, not as much freedom. And we come across it. Manufacturing is incredibly in this area, because if you think about it, and it's not a stigma, but in a demand-driven environment where you have to have X amount of stuff off the line every day to a high quality with health and safety and rules and regulations, you have to fall into that culture at certain times. There's no right or wrong. And the last culture here is the franchise culture. And I use Avon as an example of this, a directive approach to communication. This is your product set, here's your price list, here are your lead times. Now go off into your department or your territory and you've got the total ownership to execute. And these are the 4 types of culture we come across. And the big point I want to make here is this. And I kid you not, 90% of the companies I work with, don't matter how big, what industry, what style, what environment, everybody has a desire to move to the entrepreneurial culture. We want to be creative, we want to empower, and it's wonderful and it's great. But there is a huge desire to move there. And what we also find is there's a huge stigma with the military style of culture. It's old school, it's big stick, it's from the past. But actually, if I was in the military serving on combat operations, and there's a few people here, Glenn and Carl, we can ask, and we're in the middle of a war zone, I haven't got time to have a Starbucks and draw a vision board of what we're going to do next. I want to be in the military culture. I want to have standard operating procedures. I want to know my role, where I stand and what my job is. And it's the same in manufacturing. It's situationally relevant. If you want to develop a culture, we need to remove the desires and stigmas that come with certain cultures and stand by what is situationally relevant for you. Put your hands up if you was looking at that grid saying, Martin, you could go into 5 different areas of our business and there'd be a different culture in each one. Raise your hand. Couple. And that's because subcultures exist and we can't be afraid of them. Subcultures exist and we should embrace them and encourage them, again, if they're situationally relevant. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. This house at the back of me here was a client I worked with a year ago. And right at the top of the tree, at board level and director level, they wanted to drive a true visionary ownership culture. And when I visited HR, it absolutely matched that. And when I visited sales and marketing, it absolutely reflected that. But this company was a manufacturer. And the minute you step down into that environment, it is a process-driven and a directive style of communication. And that's okay. But my point here is, if you do want to develop your culture, understand you will have subcultures in the business. And as long as they're situationally relevant, it's okay. It's okay. So I made a comment right at the start of this talk, a bit of a bold comment, that we as leaders and leadership teams, we don't create culture. And I stand by that. But what is also true is that we as leaders and leadership teams, we carry the greatest ability to influence the things I've just been talking about, the culture, the environment, the people. We carry the greatest ability to do that. But why are only 12% of business executives truly focusing on it? Well, because it's hard. It's hard. It requires change, and change is hard. Guess what's easy? Getting dragged into operational stuff. Emails, process, execution, calls, meetings. I see it time and time again. I do it in my own business. You get dragged into operational stuff, so you're not thinking strategically and focusing on the stuff we should be. So we end up managing and not leading. So here's two things. Firstly, we as leaders and leadership teams, someone has to take the responsibility to own and drive organisational culture. Because remember, the problem with a shared responsibility is that it is nobody's problem. And secondly, and as best we can, we have to stop ourselves from getting dragged into operational stuff. Day in, day out, we have to elevate ourselves back up to the strategic zone so we can focus on our programs for increasing communication. We can innovate our business operating model. We can review our recognition and reward structures. We can put in training and development programs, review our recruitment process, employee engagement. We can do the things that will influence and elevate our people and our environment. And that will massively, massively impact our culture. If you want to develop a culture, try your damnedest to not get dragged into operational stuff. My final slide before I leave you with a story, a very quick story. When it comes to your strategic thinking, are you thinking top down or bottom up? Most people I work with, and it's natural, we think top down. This, what you can see behind me, is what we call a strategic stack in business. And believe me, every company I visit, we call them different things: visions, missions, values, goals, strategies. And it becomes so perplexing that our people on the ground become instantly disengaged from them because they don't get it. They see it as corporate bullshit. And that's the honest truth. They see it as corporate bullshit. Very simply put, your strategic stack, your mission should be the message to the world. What do we do as a business? What is our why to the outside world? Your vision, therefore, is the end game of your business. In 5 or 10 years' time, we're going to be X amount of employees, so many product lines, X amount of revenue. It's the end game. Your goals, therefore, are the short to mid-term milestones to achieve or put you on the way to achieve that vision. And your strategy is simply the plan to get there. And again, we confuse this. I see it all the time. I read it, I see it, I hear it, and I think, if I'm John Smith on the line of this manufacturer, I don't connect with that. I just don't connect with that. What the great companies do when they're driving their business forward is they turn this on the head and they focus bottom up. And everything we've discussed this evening is where you should start. Because the values, beliefs, and behaviours that steer your people's actions is your culture, and that's the only thing that's going to help you achieve that strategy and those goals. A really simple example of how you can do this: focus on the significant few. Think in your business now, you will have 5, 6, a dozen influencers, what I call on-the-ground influencers, people on the floor who carry the credibility and the influence with those around them. Focus on the significant few. Talk about what you do, how you do it, why you do it. What, how, why. What do we do? How do we do it great? And why is it of value to clients? What, how, why. That's the language they understand. What do we do in our business? How do we do it? And why do we do it? The minute you sell that to the significant few, they will sell it to the significant few. And this is called crowd contagion. Don't try to communicate to the masses about your mission, vision, values, goals, because it instantly becomes disengaged. Focus on the significant few and trigger crowd contagion. And a final story to leave you with. The Chinese bamboo tree is an amazing thing. When you plant the seed of a Chinese bamboo tree in the ground, it takes 4 years to break through the soil. 4 years. But when the Chinese bamboo tree breaks through the soil, in just 5 weeks, it grows to 90 feet tall. I mean, can you imagine the process of being the person responsible to grow this tree? Week 1, no success. Week 2, month 2, year 2. People are watching you watering this blank patch of soil every single month, saying, you're crazy, give up. It's not working. It's not working. You start to doubt yourself. Just raise your hand. Does anybody feel like this in business at the minute or in your personal life, where you feel like you're doing something, there's no rewards, but you can see it? Raise your hand if that's anybody in the room. Go on. That was just out of sympathy. So the question here is, does the Chinese bamboo tree grow in 5 weeks or does it grow in 5 years? Well, of course it grows in 5 years, but 90% of us and 90% of people, or a high percentage of people, we give up in that process. So our dreams, our projects, our initiatives, they die and they're buried in the ground. They die and buried in the ground. And organisational culture and cultural change and business change feels like this. It's hard. It takes time. It's easy to get dragged off into operational. It's easy to focus on results and outputs. But I implore you to focus on the inputs, to take time to focus on your people, on your environment. And when your Chinese bamboo tree breaks through the soil, you watch it grow. You watch it grow. If you want to develop a culture, you have to have an immovable belief for its value, and you have to stay the course. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.